FIRE itself isn't new. I would say even the terminology, I feel like that's been floating around for at least a decade, at least, if not more. But it's gotten into kind of the broader personal finance community at least 10 years ago, if not earlier. And then I feel like now it's becoming a little bit more, even outside of that, more just regular people who may not like pick up a personal finance book or really be in the know of like financial influencers. They may even know that terminology now. It's becoming a little bit more popular online. But even before that, if we look to early 2000s, 90s, I mean, early retirement has always been a thing. The term Freedom 55, that's a company's name. It's been around for a very long time. So this concept of retiring earlier than the standard age that we think of retirement, which is like 65, that's been around for a very long time. However, I think FIRE specifically, because I think when we're talking about early retirement, people tend to think about 50s, and that is still quite early to retire, right? You still have decades of life, potentially 40, 50 years, if you live to 100. But FIRE itself is, I think, taking something that existed for a very long time and kind of putting it to extremes, for better or for worse. So, you hear stories of people retiring at 30 when you're like, so we've had what, potentially 10, 12 years of working years, and then decades ahead of you of no more working. Or, what I'm seeing more is maybe 30 is a little bit on the extreme end, more like 40 is kind of what people are aiming for. Because again, it gives you a whole extra 10 years to build up that wealth. So we're seeing a lot of that. And in my view, so I've been, a educator, content creator for almost 15 years. And so it's been very interesting to see the evolution of what people's priorities are. When I got started as just a blogger, the framing really was, especially coming out of the Great Recession, was, stability, paying off debt, cash flow, and, eventual retirement, but on my terms, instead of, having to, work with an advisor at the bank or pay a lot of fees with a wealth management firm. I want to take ownership of that. So I saw a lot of this kind of, transition to this idea of financial independence, which is really taking ownership of your finances. And so it's been interesting to see, not just this idea of, financial independence, money on my terms, but then how can we even go extreme instead of trying to retire by 50, 40, or 30? And what can we do to achieve that in such a short amount of time? So it's been fascinating to see the transition, especially to seeing, I'm a millennial or elder millennial, seeing Gen Z still kind of continue these conversations and these paths and what they're doing to potentially achieve some of these goals of retiring extremely early. It's fascinating, but what I will say from, the people that I've known who have achieved it or maybe tried and realized this isn't for me, it's we see, especially online, the highlights and the glory of achieving that goal, but we may not be having those really important conversations about, but what are you sacrificing? What are you giving up? And do you have any regrets? And largely, I've talked to a lot of people that have been able to retire in their 30s and 40s, and they kind of look back, they're like, ooh, looking back, I don't know if I would have made the same choices, which I think is, something that people aren't talking about. Because again, that's not a very it's exciting to the idea of be like, wow, I'm a millionaire at 30 or 40. It's not super sexy to say I achieved that and I'm still unhappy. Who doesn't want like a 40-year vacation? That's kind of what we think that is on the other end of FIRE. But what you've got to realize is you are choosing a way of life that not many people are living. So if you do achieve this and now you can quit your job and you have all this free time, your peers, your neighbors, your friends, your family are not on that, are not in that world. They still have 9 to 5s. They still have limited, vacation time. And so you have to then figure out, okay, how can I continue to live my life within my community and my circle, but, they may not understand it. Or the other side is when you have all that free time, what are you going to do with it? Because you don't want to just, sometimes it's not good to have too much time to think and nothing to do, right? You want to have a purpose. And I think a lot of people that kind of are attracted to this idea of fire, they're running away from something that they may not have actually spent any time to figure out, well, what is that thing? Why is it that I want to not work anymore or achieve this massive amount of wealth really quickly? Like, what are we actually, what's the actual reason behind that? Let's like underneath, and I mean, that's when it's like, have you tried therapy? Have you tried unlocking some of those things that maybe you think money is going to be the answer, but it actually may not be. Because again, I talked to a lot of people. They thought money was the answer. They get there, they have the money. Then they look around, they're like, oh, that feeling that I had that I thought would go away at this point, it's still there. Why is that? The basis of the book really is, I've worked with individuals and couples for a very long time. They come to me with their money problems. They think the problem is money. So if I had more money, we'd have no problems. But really, it's like actually underneath that, there are other problems that we think money can solve. Money can solve some problems, but not all of them. Hence why we see all these millionaires, now trillionaires, like miserable. It's money isn't the solve for every single problem in your life. And so it's still important to talk about building wealth, but I think on the other side of it, you also have to define, okay, but what's actually lacking in my life? And is money the thing that can help me get it or not? And in the final chapter of my book, when I really kind of hone in on the connection between money and happiness, because people love to talk about, can money buy happiness or not? And a lot of people think yes or no. It's not about money buying happiness. Money can provide security, safety, opportunity, choice, freedom. But what it can't really do is you can't buy friends, you can't buy family, you can't buy community because that's just inauthentic. It can't, there's a lot of things that provide a lot of happiness and joy to people that are completely free or really, really accessible and affordable. And so you don't need $1 million to start a hobby, like that could, cost you 20 bucks a week or something like that. And so I think we've kind of lost the plot in some respects of what is money actually for, and then at what point is it not necessary, at what point is it not involved in the conversation. So it can't all just be about money. So it's not, so yeah, the title of the book is Everything But Money. Your problems with money are probably about everything but money. You think the goal is I need to get $1 million by like 35 so I can quit my job. So you think the goal is to achieve that number. But what is actually the goal? Why do you want to stop work? Why do you want to retire at that age specifically? Why do you need $1 million? All these things. Why? And you have to, ask a series of whys to really get to maybe the root of it. It's like, I hate my job. It's, I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel valued. And maybe again, we can kind of go down, why don't you feel valued? What does make you feel valued? What all these kinds of things, which, may bring up some other conversations about maybe your upbringing or how you were treated or all these kinds of things. You're like, oh, maybe that's why I don't feel seen. I don't feel heard. I don't, all these things that maybe I lacked growing up or whatever. And you would never make that connection to why you want to retire by 35. Or, a big one I see is depending on how money was presented growing up, you may want to go a certain way. If money was very scarce when you were growing up, you grow, low income, for example, and you just heard no all the time. And so money was a very negative thing. And you're like, if only I had more money, then I would not feel so restricted like I did growing up. So I'm going to do the opposite and I'm going to get as much money as possible because that will be, again, the solve for my issues growing up. And that will make me happy and make everything great. But then if you go too extreme, again, you may lose sight of why are you doing this? It's because again, you didn't like the feeling of being restricted. Well, you may not need, I see conversations like this online. You may only need $1 million to have a very comfortable retirement or $1.5 million, depending on how long your retirement is going to last. But some people are like, they get that number. They're like, ooh, you know what? That's not enough. And they keep on going and they don't know when the end point is. They don't know actually what is enough. And so that's the other problem is you actually need to define for yourself what is enough. Because as again, we see some of these ultra wealthy people, they don't know what is enough. There is never enough. And that is a really dangerous, slippery slope to be on because you will never be satisfied if you don't know what your enough, your fulfillment point is. When I started out as a blogger, the reason I got into that world was people were sharing, they weren't sharing their investment portfolios at the time. They were really sharing, this is how much I earn, this is how much I spend. So here's how I manage my money. And I thought that was so cool because no one talks about, at that time, no one talked about money. They were very, private. Money was still very, very taboo. It's still taboo today, but even more so back then. And I was so interested. I'm like, oh, so that's how you're able to, with this income and these expenses, make it work. So that was really, I thought, helpful for people being transparent. Now, I also think it's helpful for some people to, talk about investing and maybe share what they're doing, but it's a bit tricky on a couple different levels. So number one, when someone shares, this is my portfolio, here's what I'm doing, if they're a public person and especially they talk about, this is how successful I am, this is how much wealth I've built, here's my portfolio, someone will obviously make the connection, oh, so I should do what you're doing. I should replicate what you're doing to get the same result. Whereas there's no, promise that you will get the same result. Again, that's what we call performance chasing. You're chasing past returns that may not happen in the future. And there's no guarantees in life. And also not most, but a lot of influencers, content creators who talk about money don't have any formal background or education or credentials. And so you've got to be mindful of what information you're taking in as a viewer, as a user, things like that. For me, I've never disclosed my portfolio. I say I have a boring portfolio of index funds, but I won't say what's actually in it because it has nothing to do with you, right? It's like, this is for me. I know my risk profile. I've done the research. I know what's right for me. That does not mean it's right for you. But I also have the level of, I do have credentials. I am a financial planner. So I know what I can and cannot say specifically in that realm. I have other people looking at what I do. So I've got to be very careful what I say and how I frame it. So, you know, I think in one way, it's great this information is out there. In one way, you just, as a user, as a viewer, you've got to be really careful who you listen to. Not everyone's, saying the right thing. And also, you've got to ultimately always do your due diligence and do your own research because if you buy a stock that someone else bought and they made a ton of money off of it, you may not know that they sold it right before they put the video out. You buy it and then it goes down. You can't, what are the repercussions? You lost money, they didn't. And they could probably have the argument, well, I didn't tell you to buy that stock. I just said I bought it and it worked for me. What always makes the most sense to me is slow and steady wins the race. And there's a lot of glory in being boring. And so if you actually want to build wealth and, retire early and reach some of your financial goals, don't think that the only way to achieve that is doing something risky or super exciting or super fast. It needs to happen now. The people that I know in real life that aren't online, but they've built significant wealth, have done the boring, slow stuff. And so there's something to be said for that. You may not see that as much online because it isn't very exciting to put online, but is the truth. This is how real people build wealth, is the slow and steady wins the race kind of mentality.